Great, welcome everybody. Thank you for taking some time. We're going to talk about a topic that VMware doesn't usually talk about, which is applications, and specifically how to make those applications that your teams are using available in a simple and secure manner so that they can get to work building new projects. My name is Matthew Small. I work for VMware, part of the Bitnami acquisition. Bitnami provides useful open source software into any service catalogs and CI/CD pipelines that you might be using. Prior to that, I did cloud management work at RightScale, now part of Flexera.
Hi there, my name is Sanjay Garje. I lead the technical BD for AWS Service Catalog and AWS Control Tower, and I also teach cloud computing at San Jose State. So happy to be here and excited to share what we learned over all these years.
So I want to take an extra thanks to Sanjay for being here. His last session had 5,000 people in it. So you're getting some real good time to learn a lot about AWS Service Catalog and some of the capabilities for deployment time policy enforcement. So we're going to show you some cool demos today, but I'm going to kick it off by just introducing Bitnami and introducing the concepts of IT vending machine. So Bitnami's mission before VMware's acquisition in May, as well as ongoing, is to make awesome software available to everyone everywhere. But in order to do that, you need to make sure that you're doing that in a way that's both simple and secure. So for the past 10 years, we've been providing the AWS Marketplace and other marketplaces with a continuous stream of updated open source software. You can go to the AWS Marketplace today. You can search for just about any open source piece of software that's a popular project. Chances are the first or second result you'll see says certified by Bitnami. What that means is that the latest image with the most up-to-date release of that software, patched with any vulnerabilities, and provided in a ready-to-run format directly into AWS. You will find this for AMIs and CloudFormation templates, including interesting multi-tier topologies, for example, for high-scale WordPress consumption. You will also find us in the EKS Cloud Marketplace, and we'll show some EKS examples today as well. So first of all, why should you provide self-service IT? We're going to look at that. We're going to talk about maintaining those catalogs to ensure that those stay fresh and up to date. And then we're going to do some demos. So we now live in a software-defined world where applications are complex, and the teams that support those applications are also complex. Over the last 10 years with Agile, with DevOps, with DevSecOps, and with cloud services, we've seen an explosion in complexity for how applications are built in modern microservice architectures, as well as how teams are collaborating on what makes a successful cloud outcome. So one thing you can do is take a page from the vending machine playbook, and that is you can offer a central source for on-demand point of consumption delivery of useful applications and cloud services that your teams may want to use. We went to the Express Vending Machine, which is an actual vending machine company's blog, and we pulled these values for having a vending machine in the office. Staff satisfaction. It's a convenient and centrally accessible source where users can find useful things. Low overheads. This does not require a ticketing system for you to submit to and get something delivered. This is completely self-service. Healthy options. When we talk about healthy options here, it's the healthy cloud options. How should this operate in your own cloud environment? And then it also keeps staff on site, in our case, within our virtual data center walls.
One quick question. I can do this on-prem, right?
Absolutely. On-prem. Can I say that here? But we have to keep it fresh. We need to make sure that our selection is up to date, that our billing systems are not antiquated. Clouds are metered by the fractional fraction of a penny. So we need to make sure that our billing systems and how we're doing showback and chargeback to our business units are properly configured. We need a modern interface, not like this clunky old thing. We need content that's not stale and moldy. In our world, that's an insecure application that's now providing us with a vector of attack in our organization. And of course, the pipelines that keep those vending machines stocked fresh need to be free of gunk. And so that staff satisfaction comes from getting exactly what you need, and it just works. And it works within the compliance confines of that particular organization. It's stocked fresh and it's updated and continuous vulnerability free by those pipelines that are feeding this self-service access. And it's that best fit, well architected, well operated telemetry built-in experience, so developers don't have to think about adding this agent or that agent to their build pipeline. They can centrally enforce that and get that delivered to them by a central operations team in a useful way. Built to spec in the formats that you use in the operating environments that you run in. So one way to do this is to use automation to collect everybody's opinion about what makes a successful cloud outcome. Different users in your organization are going to have different levels of expertise. And cloud services are now far too complex for a full stack developer to truly have enough knowledge across enough services to be successful. So, your operating system, team is going to maintain that base OS, and you're going to have application level teams that are dealing with the framework configurations that they prefer and configurations they're on. An operations team might be selecting cloud services like Aurora DB or SageMaker from AWS to deliver that successful cloud outcome. And once you've determined what that is, you should codify that. And when we talk about shifting left, it's not about shifting left to a person or a team or a developer. Shift left to automation. Make automation do the work for you once you've agreed on what type of work needs to be done. Don't automate things before you agree, though. Now, finally, use your repositories to distribute directly to the point of consumption. Ensure that that deployment template gets delivered to the right AWS accounts and artifact repositories, to the right service catalogs and CI/CD pipelines, and so that everyone downstream of that artifact release has a good experience, and you keep stock of how things are moving through those pipelines and where they're being consumed. So with that, I'm going to transition this over to Sanjay Garje. And Sanjay is going to take you through a little bit of the introduction specifically to AWS Service Catalog, which is how you can do this natively on AWS. He's going to provide us some demonstrations, and then we're going to walk through a couple other examples at the end with containers, and we'll leave it open for some questions. Sanjay.
Awesome. Thank you, Matt, for that. And thank you, everybody, for joining us today. Thank you a lot. So how many of you have heard about AWS Service Catalog? Anybody? Okay, cool. So simple way to think about AWS Service Catalog is how do you take your best practices and automate those for your rest of the company, right? So how many of you have used S3 before, right? So S3 is simple storage service. If you know HTTP get, put, delete, you already know S3. So on day one, it's so easy to create those buckets, start putting your content in there, and life is great. But as your operational excellence and maturity grows into the cloud, you realize that after a year or maybe 2 years that, you have a lot of content now, and maybe if you were to move that from standard storage tier into Glacier, you might be able to save up to 90% on your cost, right? When it comes to security, S3 offers you client-side encryption, server-side encryption, there's versioning, yada, 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 right? So the point I'm trying to make is, just when it comes to S3, there is all these best practices you can bake in as part of your bucket creation process that you don't have to make every developer in your company an S3 ninja, right? Because you can maybe take the efforts and make every developer S3 ninja, but then we have 165, the broadest and the deepest services of any other cloud. So how do you make then everybody in the company ninja of each one of those services? And it's just impossible, right? So the idea is, you are the AWS experts who are here today. Your organization has trusted you to be here. They invested money. So when you go back, you learn all these best practices, put those in AWS Service Catalog as an infrastructure as a code provisioning mechanism, and offer that to the rest of your team, rest of your company as a self-service, right? So how does that work? It starts with CloudFormation. So have you guys familiar with CloudFormation already? Wonderful. So CloudFormation, those who are not familiar, that's our infrastructure as a code tool. So you can write pretty much anything you can create in AWS using any of our services. You can, all of those that's prime time ready is going to be supported by CloudFormation. So you can write a simple template that can spin up an S3 bucket or EC2 instance, or you can create a complete 3-tier architecture, reference architecture, multi-AZ infrastructure using matured CloudFormation template, right? So sky's the limit there, and the idea is you put that CloudFormation template as a service catalog product and add additional tagging on it. So you can say everybody that provisions an AWS resource in my company, they must tag that resource. Now, how many of you are familiar with tagging? Do you tag your resources? Exactly. I don't either, right? Because tagging to me is one of that best practice, which is so easy to understand but so difficult to follow. I equate that to like eating pizza versus salad. You know, eating salad is really the right thing for you, but every time I'm given the choice, I'm always picking the slice of pizza up, right? So this is where you can automate that best practice by putting that CloudFormation template as a service catalog product, add the launch constraint, the template constraint, add the tagging options, and that way any developer in your company, whenever he or she is trying to provision that resource, they must enter the right values for those tag options, right? So this is how you get to standardize your tagging. Now, here's the other thing. So how many of you are quote unquote builders or software engineers, right? So we, by definition, are programmed in our brain that if you haven't written a line of code, and if you haven't created a new set of functionality and delivered that to your customers, you really haven't added any value, right? That's exactly the mindset. That's why we call ourselves builders. We love change. We want to promote change in the company and keep pushing the envelope and keep adding new and new features. Now, on the other side, I did spend some time in IT as well as a system admin, cloud admin. So how many of you consider yourself like cloud admins of your company, right? Okay. Do you carry pagers, in your smartphone apps? I did, right? And those some of you who did, Murphy's Law, if you carry pager, especially on that Thanksgiving Day, Christmas Day, 2 a.m. in the morning, you're going to get the page, right? And I've been there, done that. And what is that telling you? And what your brain is getting trained that if you're in operations, change is bad, right? So you have one set of the stakeholders in a company, developers who want to go fast, build fast. That's where all the agility. But you have the other set of the stakeholders who wants to, govern that change. So how do you meet in the middle? And that's where what we are learning today with this self-service vending machine approach is you can, as the cloud IT custodian, work with your developers, come up with the right infrastructure template that is blessed by security, blessed by networking, blessed by finance, and then when the developers want to provision their stacks, they can essentially hook that up into their Jenkins job, their GitHub repo, their CI/CD pipeline, and every time they check in the code, that can in turn trigger the CI/CD pipeline, which can then in turn provision the entire infrastructure stack, right? So this is where now we talk about immutable infrastructure, right? Cattle versus pets, pets versus cattle. Servers, treat your servers as, you can destroy those whenever you want. So how do you do this? So this is where, diving deep into the detail, you're going to, as a cloud administrator, you're going to add your CloudFormation template as a product. You can have set up products, few for your developers, few for your data scientists, so you can appropriately create the collection of those things, and you can add that as a portfolio. You can add cost constraints, so those are the template constraints on that. You can add tag options library, and then for your developer standpoint, their life hasn't changed, right? So to them, cloud is an API call, and here it's still the same. AWS Service Catalog, you can consume things out of it by either CLI, by API call, or by going to console, right? So for developers, their life is still the same. All you're telling them is, hey, just use this API call when you need to do something. That way, whatever you're provisioning is blessed by your corporate IT, by your cloud center of excellence. Now, when you need to do this at scale, this is where what you do is you essentially add your primary catalog in your hub account, right? So that's where you're going to add the common set of products that are requested by your company's developers into the hub account, which if you're using AWS Control Tower, that can be your master account as well. And using the AWS organization and AWS Service Catalog functionality, you can essentially share those portfolios, those products, centrally from hub account into your spoke accounts. So if you have 200 accounts or 2,000 AWS accounts, doesn't matter. The same reference architecture that I'm showing here works across your organization. So this is how you can have 10 people Cloud Center of Excellence team, but can still support 50,000 employees across your company, right? And then a lot of my customers, they ask me, wait, but we are not the experts at all the AWS services, so we are happy to put this plumbing in, put this framework in, but how do I support all of my developers? So this is where what you can do is think about open source collaboration model, where you create this framework, put it out there, and give the hero developers in your company access to provision these products, right? So if you don't, you ask them, hey, start with this, but if you don't find the product that you want to provision, just simply create the template for that, check that into a GitHub repo or a source code repo, and we will have a CI/CD pipeline. We'll do some code test on it, and as long as it passes the bar that we set for our company, that can be released back into the Hub account, and then the automation picks it up and it gets distributed out to the rest of the company. Right? So this is where we truly go from idea to code reuse, sharing of infrastructure without reinventing the wheel every time, and this is where you can truly start to leverage each other's work. So hopefully I've demonstrated with a real example here that you can have your cake and eat it too. So you can have your security governance and you can still go fast, right? So the reason we are all leveraging AWS Cloud is we love to innovate. And in order to innovate, we need to go fast, fail fast. And this is the framework, right? This is the architecture that allows you to fail fast without getting the slap on your wrist, essentially, right? So to truly leverage the cloud velocity, I would encourage you to start, stocking up your IT vending machines with the right products. So with that, I'm going to switch to a live demo. And I'm going to give this to my friend here.
Boy, that's great, Sanjay. Thank you. And while we get set up for the live demos here, we're going to show you a couple different concepts. One is that CLI usage of Service Catalog's API, as well as how to reflect that in a nice self-service vending machine style user interface. Give us 1 sec while we do the machine dance here. Gotta love authentication tokens. I don't know why it's not coming up for me. Oh, there we go. All right. So we can get the recordings going. Maybe they'll edit this part out. Marla, please edit this part out.
Excellent. So can everybody see my screen here? Awesome. So here what I've done is I've logged in as a developer to my AWS console, which is part of the AWS Service Catalog service, right? So here, whatever the commonly requested products are in my company, that a Java developer, a web developer, a SageMaker data scientist developer, they're all here, right? So you as the cloud custodian, you can make sure your vending machine is stocked with the right products. And it's so easy. Most of the companies that I talk to on day one, they feel overwhelmed, like, oh, how do I figure all this out? But if you look at your AWS bill, most of the times you're going to figure out that 80% of the time people are spinning up 20% of the stuff. And as long as you can figure that out and put that here, by baking in the AWS best practices and your company's best practices, you're good to go. So if I'm a developer, I can simply come here now and figure out what do I want to spin up. So I have all these products in front of me. And as I promised you, you can spin this up using either going directly to the console, but as a developer, we don't like console, right? We like CLI, we like API. So I'm just going to demo this using a CLI command here. So AWS Service Catalog offers you this provision product API. So what I've done here is I've set up a SageMaker notebook locally on my machine, so I can run my command line script easily without having to muck around with the terminal window. So this command, AWS Service Catalog provision product, all you have to pass in here is the name of the product and the parameters that product requires, right? So if this was an EC2 instance product, then you're like, what's my instance type, and maybe what my SSH key is. So let's say I'm going to go ahead and say run this thing and provision a SageMaker notebook instance for me, right? Because right now, as you saw Andy Jassy's keynote, SageMaker is causing C-level change for everyday developers, right? Because the machine learning experts, they're hard to come by. So we want to democratize the machine learning and data science for everyday developers. So here I am, I'm an engineer. I want to spin up a SageMaker notebook. I don't need to know anything about SageMaker. My IT team has given me a SageMaker instance as a SageMaker as a product. All I do is create an API command, call it. So here you go. So it's actually right now getting spun up. So what I'm going to do is show you, while it is getting spin up, how can you query and the status of that, right? So the API command for that, or CLI, is describe record. So if I run this, essentially it's saying it's in progress, right? And how do I know that? So let's say if I were to switch back to my console, so here you go. And if I go to my provision product list, earlier this screen was empty, right? Because I had nothing provisioned. Now I'm going back and I see a CLI demo product that we just are in the process of spinning up. It is under change. It does take a couple minutes for SageMaker's notebook to come up. But as soon as it is available, we will see the status flip, right? And the other cool thing here you can do as the cloud admin, you can customize this logo to match your company's logo, right? So if you have your vending machine can be personalized to your company's branding. Simple stuff like that, but it makes developer like the vending machine. So we're going to wait for a couple minutes here while this is going on. If there are any questions, I'm happy to take questions as well. But the whole idea is you want to go fast. In order to go fast, you cannot sacrifice your financial spend management or your security. So this is a shake hand between the cloud security, cloud administrators, and the developers together. Take your best practices, bake those in, put into the IT vending machine, which is AWS Service Catalog, automate that, and using the hub and spoke, share that across your company, right? We do have a ton of documentation, really good information on how to set this up. So let me show that. Okay, so, all right. So in the meantime, I'm just going to go back and try and see if our demo is complete here. So yeah, this is still going on. So as soon as this is up and running, we will have the output variables back to us saying, here's the SageMaker notebook URL that I can click and log on to the SageMaker. So as that's going through, I'm going to invite back Matt here so we can go through the rest of the stuff.
Yeah,
Yep.
Thank you, Sanjay. Really appreciate that. As we wait for that to finish, and we looked at some of the command line calls, we'll take a look at another reflection of this within Bitnami's family and VMware. My voice has been reinvented.
Yeah, as you can imagine, reInvent is a lot of fun.
So as we look at this, we have the ability to actually create those catalogs. And since Bitnami produces a lot of interesting content for self-service users, we do have the ability to provide that content directly into that service catalog. So if we look here into our service catalog management console, there's Bitnami, and here's a lot of Bitnami apps. Now, one thing that we do with our Project Galleon customers, which is our enterprise secured software supply chain, is that we secure Bitnami's delivery of useful open source directly to your AWS Hub account, so you can then distribute using the hub and spoke model downstream. What we also do is we make sure that these products stay updated, including documenting change logs, including user documentation for those applications. So you will find a lot of useful purely open source applications from Bitnami in the AWS Marketplace that you can then import into Service Catalog. If you're running Kubernetes and containers, you can actually explore a project from Bitnami called KubeApps. KubeApps is a self-service catalog that sits inside of a cluster. So this is an EKS cluster where this is running. We fire up KubeApps, we hook it up to our chart repositories for our Helm charts in this case, and we can provide a catalog at the point of consumption, just as Sanjay was showing. Once you provision something, it walks you through, and it also helps you keep that thing updated. So, here's one that I provisioned earlier, still updated. That's Apache Airflow. Cassandra and Drupal have updates available because Bitnami has already produced a new version of that upstream software with either some security patches or a new software release, and maybe we want to take advantage of that. So this KubeApps experience is how you can drill all of that down into your EKS clusters at scale. You can use Service Catalog and Control Tower to create a reference architecture even for your Kubernetes developers. So Sanjay showed SageMaker. Maybe you want to run MXNet on Kubernetes, which is what SageMaker is built on. Maybe you want to provide a full sandbox to experiment with new useful open source. So I think we're running a bit short on time here. So what we want. Oh, we're good. Oh, great. So what we want to make sure that we do is also get any questions answered from the audience about applications or cloud services that you're using. We're going to do yet another dance here. We didn't want to do 3 dances, but we're going to do yet another dance here to get back to the SageMaker component and finish up that part of this demonstration. But any questions in the meantime?
Yeah, we'll just show you that it actually worked as well. But in the meantime, as we are switching the screens here, I do want to call out that as you stock up that vending machine, where do you stock that up? So if it's your day one in the cloud, you don't have a new house. And that's where you need to think about how do you automate building that new house in the cloud. And that's where AWS Control Tower is your friend. So you can use AWS Control Tower to set up your automatic landing zone, which sets up your core organization unit. It sets up AWS organization. It sets up your best practice-based landing zone where you can start deploying your workloads, right? So the mental model here, okay, looks like we are back here. So let me go back and quickly check on where we are at with our demo. All right, so if I refresh, there you go, it's available. So wonderful, I didn't cheat, it's there. And now, if I were to click on the terminal URL, or let's say the notebook URL, so let's see here, this should land me into the SageMaker notebook instance running in AWS, right? So, and I was able to do all this using a CLI command. If I were to go back into my CLI, there is, let's see here, describe ID. If I hit run, there you go. It shows me the operation succeeded, and it also shows me the tagging. So the example, we made fun of tagging with pizza and salad, but look, here I had to provide values for tagging. And on top of that, AWS Service Catalog also adds additional audit tagging, like who was the principal, what was the user's system on, things like that. In addition to that, it also gives you the same output that we saw in the console in your API call. So you don't, as a developer, you never have to go back to the console, right? So a lot of companies, they'll lock down the console access, no problem, right? You can do all of that using CLI command like this. So just a departing thought here, if you have nothing in the cloud today and you want to establish your IT vending machine, where you start with AWS Control Tower, set up your landing zone, create all those new accounts which are best practice driven, set up the right guardrails that Control Tower offers. Once you have that, then I call that setting up an empty house, right? If it's an empty building, empty house, and you give keys to the kingdom to your developers, they're just going to create floors and kitchen and sink and restrooms wherever they want, which may not meet your requirements as a cloud IT admin. This is where you use AWS Service Catalog, set up the right things in the right places using the security, networking, financial best practices that suits your company, using CloudFormation as an infrastructure as a code tool, put those products in AWS Service Catalog, put that in a hub account, right? And before you put that in a hub account, you're checking those into a Git or some sort of code commit repo, set up your CI/CD, continuous integration, continuous deployment cycle, get that deployed in hub account. From hub account, using AWS org, using AWS Service Catalog, share that across your thousands of spoke accounts, if you have thousands or hundreds, and then give the right developers and the right departments access to those AWS accounts and AWS portfolios, right? So this is how you can go from having nothing in AWS Cloud to having a fully functional self-service automated infrastructure that can allow the agility and the speed that your developers need and still have the governance and compliance that your finance, that your security, that your cloud IT admin teams require, right? So with that, I'm going to...
Let's open it up for questions. Save everybody another switch here.
Yep.
Yes,
Go
please.
ahead,
Okay, let's do this.
How do the permissions work? Do the individual developers need to actually have the provisioning permissions for the resources that are being provisioned?
Permissions and IAM.
Yeah, so great question. The question was, how do the permissions work and how do you make sure the developers are getting the right permission, right? So if you looked at Vernal's keynote today, right, he talked about blast radius. We take that really, really seriously. And the advantage of AWS Service Catalog is you don't have to give your developers direct IAM permissions to any AWS service, right? That's a big statement I'm making right here. You do not have, I'm going to repeat that again, you do not have to give direct IAM level permissions to individual AWS services, because that is where your blast radius control comes from. What you do instead is you're giving permission to the stocking, the vending machine, right? AWS Service Catalog. And when the EC2 instance or S3 bucket or whatever the underlying infrastructure that needs to be provisioned, it is the service catalog, AWS Service Catalog, that is doing the provisioning. So there is a concept of launch constraint. It's a 300 level concept, so look it up later on. Launch constraint is an IAM role that you're assigning to AWS Service Catalog, and that is how AWS Service Catalog is allowed to provision that infrastructure without your developers having any direct information. A case in point for that is if I were to go, let's say if I go back to my example demo, and what I have done is I have locked my blast radius, so my engineer user doesn't even have access to CloudFormation. So if I were to go back here and let's say click on my CloudFormation thing, guess what's going to happen? Denied. Blast radius accomplished. Right? So this is how you can, this is actually, in my opinion, is one of the best feature of AWS Service Catalog that allows you to do this blast radius, right? So if you look at Vernal's keynote and his core messaging, encrypt everything, control your blast radius, AWS Service Catalog is a natural enabler and service that allows you to do that across your rest of the 165 services, right? Awesome. Any other questions?
Great. Well, thank you all very much for your time and attention. We really do appreciate it. If you do have any other private questions you want to come up to us afterwards, we'll hang around for a little bit. Enjoy the rest of the show.
Thank you.